So, in case anyone doesn't know who we are, I'm Katrina and I write Notes from Saving the World, and I'm here with Claire Egan, who writes Life After Trauma, right? Because it used to be Beyond Survival, and I still kind of think of it like that in my head.
Yeah. Yeah, we had to rebrand, so we're now Life After Trauma.
Okay. Yeah, and you also collate survivor stack as well, correct?
Yeah, we've got, I think, more than 90 people. So if there's anybody watching this who is writing about trauma or exploring those kinds of themes and would like to be involved, just reach out to me. I'm always adding people to it. And it's a really useful resource, I think. Lots of readers have reached out and found new newsletters to follow that they really enjoy. So it's such a lovely project. I love doing it.
That's great. Yeah. And I'm so glad Claire is with me today to talk about hope, because hers was the first when I started doing the hope scrapbook. Claire's was the first essay I read. And I was very glad it was the first essay I read, because she brought that trauma lens and that overcoming trauma perspective to hope. It made it feel like a more approachable subject for me. So I'm very glad that you're here and you can bring that perspective and experience. Just to backtrack a second, in case people aren't aware, I started doing a project that was sort of inspired by my own sense of not feeling very hopeful about climate and about various sort of things in my life. And I think, having worked in the aid sector for so long, I felt often quite disillusioned about how things happened. And I wanted to try and think about I felt like that was a product of the systems rather than like an empowered stance. I wanted to try and challenge my own kind of sense of apathy or disillusion. And so I started asking other writers to contribute to a project about hope. And Claire was one of the writers who did that. And so that's what we're here today, to learn a little bit more about Claire's wisdom from going through going through this journey around hope. And I think for me it was really it was a useful project to do, because I did find my own mind kind of clicking into place. I was writing it in terms of thinking like, oh, I could see that through a different lens, or I could think about that differently. So for me that was really valuable. Yeah, but Claire, to sort of kick us off, like I said, like, yours was the first piece I read, and I really liked that you began in sort of this sense of, you brought up this idea of hopelessness, and I related to that particularly. Also, you had shared experiences of working in NGOs and going through a trauma recovery experience. So I'd really like to know a little bit about, your insights into how you started to find hope in a difficult period. Like, how did you try sort of get a sense of, like, even like the sound, the taste, the smell of it, like sometimes it's just little signs that we get that something feels a little bit more hopeful again. And I just love to get a sense of what you'd like to share from your journey there.
Such a great question. Because so that essay I wrote was, I wanted to write something about hope for the American presidential election. And I had lived through 2016. A lot of us had lived through that. The moment where, like, it was my birthday is the 8th of November. So I went to bed. I made a cake. I was like, this is going to be good. I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning. I had therapy that evening, actually. And the therapy was not at that time going well at all, to put it very mildly. So I had really difficult day at work, and then was devastated by therapy, and was like, I'm making my cake, I'm going to bed, I'm going to wake up and we're going to have the first female American president. And we all know how that turned out. And that morning, here in Ireland, like, we're kind of getting the news as we're getting up, getting ready to go to work. It was just like, I will never forget that devastation. Not just that Hillary Clinton had lost, but that somebody who had bragged about sexual assault, publicly recorded, it was not disqualifying for him for this most important job in the world. And the fact that so many people had kind of understood who that person was and is, and still were like, yeah, this is the man, like, I would like him to represent me as on a global stage. This is the person I think is best able to do the job. And, like, obviously I don't want to go down a whole political path, and I am not American and have not lived in America for a long time. But as a foreigner and somebody who loved America and had great experiences there, it was devastating. And I was working in Amnesty International at the time, so I went into the office, and of course there was a lot of devastated people there. And we were all shocked, but also kind of getting ready to say, like, what is the fight going to look
Oh,
like?
I don't know if it's me or Claire that's, was that me or you that cut out? I'm not sure, but
I
we're
don't
back.
know. But it's a good nudge to me to like hurry up the story.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'll take the nudge, Katrina. Thank you. um I guess it was a time in my life when I felt like there was no hope, and people around me were kind of like, yeah, we can fight, we can do this. And I was like, what, why? Like, why would we do that? There is no evidence of this, there being any sense of possibility from a political point of view, but also for me personally at that point in my life. I wrote about in the piece, I was pretty deep in the trauma that I was going through around sexual violence and the death of my mother and all of this really horrible, difficult stuff that had happened to me as a very young person. And I was in like my late 20s, and really had just reached a point where I was like, I can't keep going. Like, this is just too much shit for one person. And you asked me what hope tastes like and smells like and feels like, and at the time, like, I didn't have any hope. Like, there's no point in pretending I did. I kept going anyway. I kept like getting up each day, well, not each day, most days, and doing my best and keeping going and getting knocked back a lot. But it didn't, there was nothing about it that felt hopeful. Like, it was just a drag. um it's funny, actually. I This week was back kind of in the neighborhood where I used to live around that time, and it's funny how your body remembers. It was very strange to be there, like older, more settled in my life, happier in my life, and just feel the kind of tug back of like, oh, I used to walk this street, and
Mm.
just it just was a really difficult moment in my life. Um, so I guess the answer is that I didn't have any hope. um, and that's rational sometimes, I think, for a lot of people who've been through trauma.
Uh-huh. I think that's what I found so reassuring about your piece, that I think there can be a sense of sort of shaming ourselves and sort of further making ourselves feel bad when we feel
Mm,
hopeless, because we feel like we've sort of done something wrong. We've also not got life right. We've kind of done all these things in the wrong way. And then we
mm,
sort of further shame ourselves because we feel bad about it. But I think in my own sort of trauma recovery journey, which I feel I'm still on, but very much I had a sense of like part of the release for me has been in recognizing that it's normal to have certain reactions, it's normal to feel a certain way, it's normal to have these sort of it's normal to feel hopeless if
mm,
life has kind of handed you out a lot of things that kind of create that experience around you. So I really appreciated that lens, because I think it made it feel like something, because you were going from hopeless to a sense of more kind of, I would say, like very uplifting kind of hope, quite sort of activisty hope in the way that
mm,
you frame. And so it made it feel like that's a journey that we can all go on, because you started in a dark place and you moved into a place that felt more reassuring. Yeah, and
mm,
I mean, one thing I would say as well is that I mean I was sort of conscious that people with certain lived identities have certain experiences as well, and you talked a little bit about having this sense of like survivor bias, but I also wanted to make sure I brought in different perspectives of people from around the world about hope, because I think a lot of the hope I feel like we read about in Instagram and things is sort of feels very glossy,
yeah.
and I didn't relate to that, and I wanted to be able to have people's different lived experiences of what that looks like, and how you go about shaping that. And yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit more about survivor bias, because I think that's something that I'm still sort of grappling with. I still feel a little bit sometimes like not hopeless about things, but like a sense of like maybe not quite, I don't quite have a survivor story to tell. I have
Mm,
various of like good things I've done, but I don't feel fully like I can say, oh, I went through all this trauma and it was worth it. Like, I don't feel that about my journey, whereas I feel like you have more of a positive story to tell in some ways. But I wonder if there's you have a sense of that we don't really hear enough stories of the people who maybe are like halfway through or haven't really kind of gone
mm.
that journey. Is our culture too much sort of survivor bias in some ways?
I think it's a really important question, Katrina, because it's easy in one sense to kind of to have hope if some things are going well in your life in a particular moment. And I think there are it's one of the funny things about kind of writing about my life through my newsletter and my work is that there is I have a lot of boundaries around kind of the things in my life that are happening at the moment that I'm writing about. So a lot of the stories that I share are things that happened like a decade plus ago, so when you look at them, I think it can kind of give an impression that my life is maybe a bit smoother than it is, because I definitely have like this last couple of weeks and months has not been an easy kind of patch in my life. But I suppose what feels different now compared to 10 or 15 or 20 years ago is that I have more understanding of being able to go through those ups and downs and come out. Whereas for a long time I was just in a hole and just there was no hope, there was no sense that I could come out. Like there was nothing on the other side. Like it was just misery. It was just suffering. Um, and I suppose it for my life, for my own personal experience, it feels like there are days where I'm like, oh, this is great. Like, look at my life. I've really built this beautiful life. And days where I wake up and I'm like, I'm not getting out of bed. Like, there's nobody persuading me that it is worthwhile to get up today. And those days are not that as common as they used to be. But I think that the binary can be really dangerous for people, that you kind of expect that there's going to be something more wonderful waiting than there is. Um, and I think that really is complicated by the survivor bias that I was writing about in the piece. That I've been able to kind of tell a more positive story or a more optimistic story because I like am a nice middle class white lady who has the resources to be able to go to therapy and loves to read and research and could do my own kind of research work when I didn't get, I went to my medical appointments, didn't get the care I needed, went home and googled it and ordered the books and read the books myself and did that. And that's not something that everybody can do. Everybody has the time or the brain space or the capacity to do that. And those things are all so deeply determined by race and gender and ethnicity and disability, all of the other ways that people are marginalized in society. And that has nothing to do with the individual people. Like
Mhm.
that is 100% based on the structures and the way that we as a society have set ourselves up. So I think it's really important to bear in mind that whatever burden anybody is carrying individually, you're also carrying the burden of however society is set up to make your life more difficult. And there were ways that my life was more difficult than it would have been for a male survivor, for example. But there are other ways that it would have been easier than somebody else. So I think as I wrote that piece, um, the thing that I couldn't forget was how nuanced and how complex it is. Because if I had written that piece in a different moment, it would have come out differently. And somebody else writing on the same topic would obviously have had a very different perspective. So I think there's such important questions that really make the question of hope real and tangible, um, in a way that is better than kind of that Instagram gloss of, you know, everything is sepia toned and positive and everybody smiles all the time. So yeah, that's what.
I mean, I resonate with so much of that actually. I think partly having lived in lots of different countries, and then also, for the past 5 years, I've designed global events, and I always have
Mm,
in my mind like lived experience. Like, how do I make a stage that has a lot of different lived experience on it and is not
mm,
just showing one aspect of this global issue? So that's something I think about a lot. And actually, in my novel, which is Looking for an Agent, I have a character who went through some similar things that I went through, but is a much more vulnerable kind of, in terms of their identity. Because
mm,
in a way, part of my brain needed to understand like how what happens when you don't have that support, or what happens when you don't have that kind of help, because I was conscious as well that it took me quite a long time to eventually go to therapy, but I was so conscious of like, if I didn't have that help, I don't know how I would ever have, got out of, like you say, that really 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 sort of dark heavy times. I
mm.
don't really know if I've recovered. But I think that's also partly to do with the sort of societies which isolate us as
Yeah,
well, and which make us alone in our troubles, whereas they make us like connected when we're happy is an okay time to be connected, but when you're kind of down, it's a less easy. People don't really have, I don't think we've really learned the skills how to be with people when they're having a hard time. And so I think that feel even more hopeless or even more lost when you are having a hard time, or you are feeling like you can't really show up with a happy face.
Mm. It's
Yeah.
very, yeah.
It's no, it's an interesting topic. I'm trying to remember what the final question I was going to ask you was, because I've got so distracted now. But no, I think this is a really interesting topic. And were there, beyond therapy, were there things that supported you in your recovery, or what was therapy really the thing that kind of switched things for you?
It wasn't, no. And I think a lot of people assume, particularly for people who've experienced sexual violence in childhood, there is a little bit sometimes the assumption like, oh, you clearly need therapy and a lot of therapy, and like, please go and solve your problems over there with a therapist and not, in community with the rest of us. So therapy was part of my recovery, and it still is. I'm going next week. But it wasn't everything. I wrote a piece recently actually about kind of the things that made the most difference in my life. Things like writing and creativity was really important for me. I'm running the Artist Way. I know that you're part of it, Katrina. Thank you so much. Through the community at the moment, so we're kind of exploring each week different aspects of creativity and recovery and the kind of intersection there. So that really grew from my own experience of finding that very useful. I think movement was helpful. I don't like the word exercise. I couldn't exercise. That was too triggering for me. But kind of finding ways to feel comfortable in my body physically again. That was a big thing. Um, there were lots of things. It's really hard to distill down the things that helped me start to turn things around. But I think it's everybody has to kind of design that path for themselves. And I hoped with that piece that I shared as part of kind of the Ask Claire series, I wanted to give people a few pointers, a few places to start. I remember years ago Googling like, how the hell do you recover from this? And it was not a hope. That was not a good idea to Google that, because there was no hope to be found in the Google. Like, it was just, you're fucked in all of these different ways. I hope it's okay to swear.
It,
Um,
yeah,
it was
no, we like.
really like depressing to do that, and I wanted, if somebody else googles how do I rebuild my life after sexual violence, I wanted there to be something, not a list that guarantees your is going to be impactful for you, but at least a starting point. So if people are curious, I think I'd really point them in that direction.
No, I think that's great, and I think that's what I really liked about learning about hope by reading other people's experience of it, is that
Mm,
there's not really a cookie cutter way of making yourself feel hopeful, particularly in the stress times that we live in terms of economic stress, sort of global environmental and climate stress. But there are a lot of different people who have been through hard things, who have managed to craft a way to feel optimistic about life, about how we live in it, about our creating meaning, I guess, also within our lives. And that for me was helpful to take away from the conversation ultimately.
mm,
Um, and I think I think we sort of touched on the question of systems already, because that was something we were going to talk about. But I think maybe it'd be interesting to think a little bit about um, I think what one thing I really taken away from this conversation, Claire, is how you talk about, when we write about things, sometimes they're kind of like a period of our lives that
mm,
are sort of a certain period, and that creates a sort of certain arc. And sometimes in our lives we're kind of sitting in the middle of things, but that's not necessarily the time to share it, and that potentially creates a sort of bias about
mm,
how we see the world or how we experience the world, because other people are not necessarily writing or sharing about the moment when they're in the thick of it. They have a story where there's an end point, where they have survived something, or they've undergone something that
mm,
has an end story, a little bit like a movie arc. Whereas a lot
mm.
of us, what we're experiencing is a lot more like this, and
Yeah.
that can contribute to that feeling of like there's no hope here. Whereas
Mm.
actually, having different lenses and looking at different people's experiences is a way to kind of generate that.
Mm, for sure. Yeah. And I think it's really important. Um, like when we talk about trauma, in a lot of conversations, a lot of contexts, people are so uncomfortable with the pain of that, understandably uncomfortable, that they very quickly want to pivot. And then I recovered. And here's a photo of me on like the top of the mountain. Um, but that's not real. Like that there's I'm sure that's real for some people. I don't want to deny anyone their experience, but it isn't. Sexual trauma is not something that you like have a makeover and you get over and you never think of it again. Like that's not realistic as a goal, at least for my own personal
Like
experience.
over and recover.
Yeah, it is something. A lot of these things that we talk about in this conversation and through the newsletter are things you live with for the rest of your life. So if we are to try and find hope within that, I think we also need to be honest about
Mhm,
that. And the moment, as you say, Katrina, it's really wise. The moment that somebody picks to tell their story, you know, it might resonate with you, it might not, but individually, I suppose we're all trying to find our way through it.
mhm,
And even if it never looks like Instagram, we still can find something that
mhm,
feels a little better than it was yesterday or last week or last year. Um,
mhm. No,
yeah.
I love. I think one thing I've been telling myself as I've been kind of navigating unemployment the past few months has been having a sense of I can choose what story I tell myself right
Mm,
now. So even if it's not a story I'm putting out into the world, I can decide what the narrative is around what's happening.
mm,
Um, I think that that's something that's helped me not always feel more hopeful because I've still sort of sometimes descended down, but it has helped me feel like I have an agency over what's happening, and I can sort of, have a moment. Sometimes when you're having a sort of very deep trauma response, you don't have that sense of agency, but it at least gives you one of the pathways out of it, I think, which is, yeah, which I
yeah.
think is really.
Yes. Can I
Mhm,
also give a quick plug for the scrapbook, the Hope scrapbook? Because I think it's such a beautiful idea, and it's such a lovely. I love things that are collective and that feel communal. And if there's anybody watching this who has not read it and absorbed it, I really think that's a beautiful place to start because it's like we're having one conversation here, but there are lots of other conversations happening in the post and in the comments. So I really think that's a really good place for people to go.
No, thanks, Claire. Yeah, I really enjoyed creating it. So if it is a topic that's resonating with you, I think it is great to read all these different writers' voices around how
Mm,
they particularly thinking about climate emergency or
yeah.
kind of overall sort of structural things that aren't necessarily inclusive. There's a lot
Mm.
of different perspectives in there that I think are really valuable. And I had great fun on Canva. I was a bit worried that I went a bit too much on Canva, but I was like, I don't care. It's
It's
great to
beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah.
see sort of colorful space because that's what makes me feel hopeful. So,
Yeah.
yeah, thanks, Claire. And I don't know exactly. I don't think I'll do one every month because it's quite a lot to sort of pull together. But probably in the next 2 months, I'm going to do another. I'm going to do a new scrapbook, which will be another collaborative piece. And this asks people to vote. What they want to look at is shifting the Western lens. So there'll be an opportunity also to contribute to that and have a think about that topic, which I think is quite meaty. And I'd love some diverse, different, global perspectives on that. So be really interested in hearing different points of view.
Amazing. I can't wait.
Great. I also see we've got like quite a lot of comments. I don't really know how. Sorry, this is my first time using live. I don't know if I can actually read comments. But hi everyone, and thank you if you've commented. I might have to comment and reply back later because I'm not entirely sure how I can see them right now. I don't know if you're successful in that, Claire.
Not really. I've also managed to move my own self off the screen. Oops. But I will do the same. I'll look at the comments when we're done. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me, Claire, and thank you everyone for showing up as well. I
Yeah.
hope this is a good conversation. I feel like Claire has so much sort of knowledge on these topics that I really love reading and hearing her perspective on it. So do check out more of her posts if you want more of that.
Thank you so much, Katrina, for the invitation. This was really, really fun. I really enjoyed it.
You too. Thank you,
Okay.
everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.